Hi, and welcome to Customer Value and Beyond again. My name is Stephen Lewandowski, and I'm super honored to have you on board with us again today. And I'm super happy also that we have Jim with us again today as our co-moderator. We have a very exciting episode today, and we again will be talking a bit about tech, B2B SaaS, customer value, customer success, and our probably shared experience of a few decades in the tech industry. We will try to find some topics where we find trending topics, and we'll also discuss some things we see in the current sphere where we might find a few things where we hope you'll get a laugh out of it, but also get value out of what we want to share with you. Today, I have the honor of not just having Jim with us on the call, but also having a good friend, comrade from the industry, and just a powerhouse of customer success with us. So happy to introduce Jim again, and also welcome Paul Ferguson to the call. Welcome, Paul, and maybe welcome you to the show, starting off with, where do you come from? What have you done in customer success? And maybe can you share with us maybe a little bit about what might not be on your profile where we might think, oh, that's a funny twist or a fun fact about Paul we didn't know about. Welcome.
It's really good to be here, and thanks for inviting me. Hey, Jim. So who am I? We go back about 10 years, Stephen, right? We met when customer success was in its infancy. I think it was one of those meetups. I want to say it was either in Dublin or London, but we met there when people were still trying to define what customer success was. We got on very well with each other. We bumped into each other at subsequent meetups. We even did a gig together, right? We saw the great John Legend here in London when you were over.
Gary Clark Jr. Sorry, John Legend is great as well, but it was Gary Clark Jr. Yeah.
I'm glad you corrected me. That's why you're here as a moderator, right? To make sure that what I say actually makes sense.
I finally have a job.
Yeah. So I love the description of customer success powerhouse. I'm a customer success professional. I'm an evangelist. I've been in the industry for about 6 years. I had tenured time at Cisco, helping them to get partner success. So this is customer success for their rather large partner ecosystem up and running here in EMEA. That was hugely successful. And then for the last almost 6 years, I've been at Tanium, endpoint platform company, and I'm working here as a director of customer success. We're helping some of the world's biggest and most mission critical organizations be safer places to work. So that's what I do. You asked for something that's not on my LinkedIn profile. There's a lot that's not on my LinkedIn profile, but here's a simple one. I've got this on today, mainly to protect. I have no hair. It's to protect from the glare of the light in front of me. But the fun fact about me is I think I've got over 30 hats at home, different hats. So
30.
Whether they're a big boy or a newsboy like this, whether it's a trilby, whether it's a pork pie, whether it's a Homburg fedora, you name it, I have it. Probably the only hat I don't have a bowler hat. I don't have a top hat. I don't have a beret, but all those types of hats I have. The reason why I've got so many is because I've got them in different materials. So some for the colder months, the wools and the tweeds, and then in
solidarity, Paul. Plus, I got the same problem you have.
Respect you. Stephen doesn't need one.
I would have to find one, actually.
Well, if you need any advice, right, I will. I'd be happy to help you there.
Always, because I heard you're kind of an expert on these topics as well. Fun fact.
An expert. Expert is probably pushing it a bit, but one of the other things I do outside of customer success is I volunteer with a great charity here in London. They're called Suited and Booted, and we take dead stock from retailers, and we take donated smart business appropriate clothing from men that work in the city, and we basically help vulnerable men. So they're low income, they're unemployed, whatever. We are helping these men to get interview ready. And part of the interview readiness is coaching and mentoring them around things like CV and interviewing skills. But it's also about helping them to look and feel the part. So I volunteer with them as a stylist, which means that I work with the clients to get them, looking and feeling the part before they go and go to their interview.
Nice. How did you come across that? So I know you well, knowing you for quite a few years. I would imagine that style and appearance is something that you're interested in anyway, right? Because I've always, I think from day one, thought, oh my, Paul is a very stylish person, right? So, but how did you come across that topic or that NGO in particular?
I mean, you're right. I've always been very curious about menswear, and I've been really fortunate within my last two organizations to work for companies that give you generous paid time off allocations to go and do good things locally. The way I came across Suited and Booted, quite frankly, I changed jobs and I didn't need all the suits that I used in my previous job. And I just, I didn't want to sell them. They're all in really good condition. And my partner, Nikki, came across them, I think, on Instagram, right? And so I kind of dry cleaned them, spoke to them, took them in, actually, decided to take them in so that I could see for myself. And I guess I was really inspired by what they did. And I thought that actually this would be a really good way for me to spend my volunteering time. And I've been doing that with them for around 3 years. So I started off donating, and then, I got into volunteering, and like I said, I've been doing it for over 3 years now, and it's super humbling, and it's super inspiring as well.
Nice, I love it. And I think you already positioned it in a super important topic, right? When companies allow their employees also to do volunteer work during your daily work, or also sometimes for like special like team events or something like that, I think that's super valuable. I remember back in the day we had an event where also for a day we could decide which NGO or public service we wanted to do for a day. And we actually had the opportunity to support my wife's NGO, who was running an NGO which is called Periodensystem, or Period System, and is supporting women's health and period poverty, actually, right, in cities, awesome. Which is also a lot overlooked topic. So I can imagine, because it kind of feels good to doing all that stuff that we do, right, which usually drives revenue, shareholder value, and other, of course, very important topics. It just feels good to also drive some real world value to, especially people who might otherwise be not in the position to benefit from other things.
Totally right. I mean, we're all fortunate here, right? We can find employment, and we can live in secure homes with heating and lighting, and we take all of this stuff for granted. And perhaps I shouldn't say this, but quite often a lot of the problems we have in business, they're actually first world problems, right? Whereas
absolutely.
Quite often when you're working with NGOs and charities, you're working with someone that's homeless, right? You're working with someone that's on remand. You're working with someone with a learning difficulty, right? Or with mental health issues, or, the period poverty one. So, these are people that have real world problems. And, that really does enable you to put things into perspective when you compare it with your, you've missed your metric, which is probably inappropriate for your customer anyway, because it's about you and not them. It sort of puts it all into perspective for me. So, yeah.
So Paul, maybe we talk about that a little bit. So you help folks look the part and get prepared for job interviews. Is that right? Is that
That's
what
correct?
You're doing?
Yeah.
So maybe we can correlate that to what we typically talk about here, which is customer value, but value in general. Because ultimately, and this might be apropos for a lot of folks out there, for me in particular, like I'm in the job market, I'm looking for a job. So if you had to recommend one thing that somebody could do, regardless of what their economic status or where they are in their career, but they're out there looking for a job, what's that one thing that you tell them in terms of how they can convey their value within that interviewing or that job seeking process?
I think that whatever your background and whatever your experience and whatever you're doing now, you will have something that is transferable to the role you're in, right? So, if you're going for a role in retail, but you don't have retail experience, but you've been a classroom assistant in a school, actually, you've got a ton of experience around handling, lots of unruly kids that are here, there, and everywhere. And so that's real core people skills in a very, very challenging environment. That can apply in a retail environment. So for anyone that's in that position where they're looking, just look to your transferable skills. There's a lot of people that are not working but are volunteering. There are so many real world transferable skills you're going to get there that actually apply just as well in the real world. So that would be, the one thing I would recommend. And if you're not volunteering, then volunteer. And because then that's, if you're in an interview situation and someone turns around to you and they say, tell me about the time when you did this, you've got, whilst it's not specific to the industry, it's real world and it's real people focused, right? And so that has a currency, and then it's on you to really bring that across when you're in the interview situation.
And I think that's so important when you. Oh, sorry, Jim. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, I've been interviewing, and not that I want to make this about me. There's sometimes where I do a good job in pivoting, where they may ask me a question where my experience might be, and no, I haven't done that, and I've fallen flat in some of these interviews. I haven't had to look for a job in a long time, so it's a new muscle for me, where I've simply answered like, no, I haven't done that, where I'm like, oh crap, I needed to actually pivot and say, well, here's what I have done that's relevant, and let me tell you a story about a situation and a problem I solved and what the solution was and what the outcome was. So I think it's, to your point, it's super important that if you're asked a question in an interview process, even though you might not have direct experience, always draw upon those things that are transferable and have the ability to pivot the conversation to talk about those things rather than just simply saying, no, I haven't done that. I've made that mistake, and guess what? I didn't get called back in the next interview.
Yeah,
and I learned the hard
absolutely.
way.
And you know what one of the things that helped me, when I was looking for a role a few years ago, one of the things I learned about was the SAW model, which you guys probably know. So, if you're looking to take your transferable skills and show a prospective employer how those transferable skills relate to your current role, right? Then, that simple SAW acronym will help you. What was that situation? What was the obstacle? What action did you take? And then what was the result, right? And, quite often just taking those transferable skills, framing them around that acronym, internalizing them and knowing them will put you in a position of strength, I feel, when you're in that situation, Jim. I think, Stephen, you had a question for me.
Yeah, and I think that's super interesting because a lot of times, and yesterday was an example where I was on a panel of a customer success event, and during the conversations afterwards, there was also a lot of talk about like these transferable skills, right? From what did you learn during your career that might have helped you during that period, right? We'll not go into details that much, but it was basically about what separates someone that might have to build up, like, for example, a customer success team at a startup company compared to somebody who's leading a customer success team at a larger organization, right? What might be different skill set, but also skills that require for leading and finding also personnel for that team. And I would be just curious about something I usually see in customer success or very experienced customer success managers, like this very curious nature, right? Of really wanting to understand why my partners, customers, peers are doing things, what kind of value they generate from that, and what the intention was to do that, right? And that natural curiosity. And maybe as a segue from your NGO work also to your career skills, where do you think that was transferable and that like genuine curiosity about the actual outcome. What helped you most from your customer success background to also benefit in other areas?
It's the curiosity thing. You've mentioned it. I think one of the my biggest observations around customer success over the last 10 years is, as it's grown, the information and the knowledge has grown. And I feel that because it's an organization, because it's seen as a functional endeavor, it almost, I kind of feel like for some folks, it's a series of task-based interactions, right? You're going to do these things to your customer, right? As opposed to collaborating with them to get them to the end game, right? You're going to do a QBR with them. You're going to do a survey, anyway. So I kind of feel that one of the things that is key around the customer success piece, and this doesn't matter whether you're in retail or whether you volunteer or whether you work in customer success, and you mentioned it was the curiosity. And I like to call it professional curiosity. As a CSM, right, forget what the book tells you and all of those things that are your foundational domain knowledge around the subject, because you've got those and you'll develop those over time. But I feel like there are the softer skills, right? And the professional curiosity is the biggest one, right? I was talking to my colleagues earlier, and we were talking about value, right? And this is where professional curiosity will help. Quite often you're asked by your leadership, or you're told by your leadership, you have to go and show value with your customers, right? Totally right. That's what we're here for. But quite often, especially if you're early in career, or if you're new to CSM, you actually don't know how to do that, right? You've no idea where to start. Do you have to go to your model and find an artifact and use that to guide you, or do you use instinct or whatever? And I think one of the simplest ways to go about that is curiosity. It's about your ability to ask the right questions and then listen and feed off of those, right? And that's kind of what that's worked for me. I can think of an example with one of my customers where I was with them for lunch, right? And we were just talking about sort of business as usual. And he said to me, Pultanium's been really good this week. It's saved my life on a project, right? And I was kind of like, wait, that sounds really good. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? You're not going to get away with just telling me that and not telling me more. And so I got him, and he talked to me about a lot of the real technically based functional stuff that it enabled him to do. But for me, as a relatively non-technical person, it was still a little bit, okay, I think that's good, but I really still don't know for certain, right? Unless I go off and talk to my teams. And again, you can sort of continue. So I was like, well, so what does that actually mean, right? And I got more tech answers, and then I said, so what does it mean you can do now, or what has it prevented you from doing? And then he said to me, oh, it means that I don't have to hire 6 analysts for a 12-month period. And I thought, wow, bingo, I've got it. Right. So I was like, thanks. And then I went away and worked with did some assumptions-based calculations to put a number around that, worked with my value engineering team. And then I went back to see him, and I said, look, here's what I think that's worth to you. Here are my caveats and assumptions around it, around things like the hourly rate of the analysts and stuff like that, where I got it from. How accurate does that seem to you? Is that like what you're talking about? And he was like, it's there or thereabouts. And I thought, well, great. Okay, so we are going to record this. And in our next QBR or EBR or review with the stakeholders, we are going to play that back to them, and we are going to get them to acknowledge that value was delivered, because here's the number. And that's comes from the curiosity the professional curiosity to ask the question. Because the other thing would be, the other scenario is, yes, Tanium was really great for me. Oh, great, that's good to know. What did it do? Oh, it saved me doing these tasks. Oh, that's really brilliant. I'll put that in my internal stand-up and we'll move on.
Yeah.
But that's not going to help them further down the road.
Exactly. I think what you did perfectly, and I love that example, is you kind of tied the number also to like an exciting story, right? And I remember back in the day at Signavio, for example, right? Our CEO and founder Gero always called it the dragon story, right? This was always the dragon story you need to be able to tell about your customers. And I think it's so powerful if you have that understanding in the whole organization about, okay, we're not just a software vendor. We had this example earlier, right, with task lists, right? So that might be call to actions, but we don't want to talk about how we drown our customers in task lists, right? We want to talk about how we actually drive their business and ideally maybe drive a real world outcome, right? Maybe even something that might help people, right? So that would be awesome. So looking at a great example you just had, what would you propose to someone? And being a lot on these also customer success meetups and events and panels, there seem to be many companies that are not there yet. What would you propose to somebody in maybe a head of customer success or a similar role, how they can approach that? How can they get that story topic basically into the minds of their whole organization, so that it kind of can work as a glue for everybody to understand the vision and drive shared outcomes?
It's a really interesting question, that is, because I've long believed, and I still believe, that if you have a consistent model, and if you have codified stages and different interactions, and everyone works within that, you've got a level of consistency, right? And you do. But as I mentioned earlier, the danger is that you have all these things that you're doing to the customer. So I think to get to that point, it really is about starting with customer, right? Sometimes I see organizations that have their customer-centric approach, but it's very much about how they report to themselves and gaze at their navels internally, right? I think you've got to start with your customers. And it depends on how long you have been around as an organization. But if you've been around for a few years and you've got lots of customers and you've worked with lots of customers for a long time, then you're going to have a ton of data, right? You're going to have experience of real value delivered to customers in segments or in different sizes or industries or whatever. And so you've got to bring that into bear, and you've got to use that to shape how you have that approach. So I think you've got to start with the customer, and then you've got to look at the culture, because I really do believe that being a customer-centric or a customer success focused organization where everyone's involved, it's a cultural shift, right? If you take customer success in its traditional form, all of those things we do to customers to drive adoption and expansion, the QBRs and the success plans and all that sort of stuff, there's the sort of the case study, the success story, the advocacy. Many organizations have an advocacy team that works with you to do that. So basically, the customer-focused, customer-centric element extends out to them as well, right? In the same way that it extends forward to those that were part of the landing motion, your pre-sales teams and your sales teams. So it's trying to drive that culture through. And I feel like that culture comes from an approach, the way you approach things, and it's about not focusing on your own task-based interactions. It's about starting with them and working it back to you.
Stephen, you mentioned the dragon story. That's slaying a dragon, right? Like, if I remember correctly from Gero, you mentioned the dragon story. People might be like, what the hell is that?
I'm curious about the dragon story, actually.
It's like, it's the hero story, slaying the dragon, not
exactly
how to train your dragon or an offshoot of a Bruce Lee bio or anything like that. Right? It's slaying the dragon.
Yeah, it was a story, I think the hero story,
Okay.
because the stakeholder would be the hero and the success would be how they slayed the dragon, the slayed dragon being the outcome they achieved.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Maybe we can. So, all right. So, Paul, we had a conversation just briefly before, we get on this podcast, and we were talking about LinkedIn a little bit, and if there was a post. I don't know if you mentioned it by name, but you see a lot of stuff out there about how your QBRs suck, and your CSMs are burned out. Um, you have to convey customer value time and time again, and you're doing it wrong. So that's great. We figure out like nothing's working. What is working? Like if you had to pick the one thing that really just worked well for you and your team, or maybe just what's the one thing you can get started on today that works really well? I don't know, what is that thing?
Oh, that's a fantastic question. And it's such a broad question because there are a lot of things that you can do. And I just think you've got to take it back to your customer, right? And who matters within that customer. So, quite often if we're in the SaaS world here, right, then we're typically representing a software company. We're selling and operationalizing a product or a platform that is uber technical and uber complicated, right? And so instinctively, our conversations and our interactions with those customers are led by the technology, right? They're very technology focused. They're with technology folks that are really interested in the technology. And the danger of that is two things. We sideline real business reasons. And B, which is probably more alarming, you are then sidelined and marginalized and put into the box of just talking to those technical folks, right? Because you're not talking a language that matters to the business. So you're there. So again, you have to start with the customer. And I would say, don't start with your technology. Don't start with your technology. Start with their business case. They would have bought your platform for a reason. They probably created an internal business case based on a successful trial or proof of concept. Get access to that and understand why it was bought and what problem it was going to solve. Because if you're rocking up at a customer, your salesperson who did the deal's no longer around, you've got your tech folks there, you've got a new salesperson that doesn't really know the customer, and you're being put in front of them for an introductory meeting, but you don't know why they bought what you've got. You're going nowhere, guys, because you don't know what your purpose is, do you? So get your purpose, and the only way you can get the purpose is to start with the customer.
That's great. Do you have any certain like methodologies or frameworks that you've used to do that thematically or to do that repeatedly, where you can time and time again broach that subject with your customers, but also align it with, let's say, like what your products are purposely built to do? So here's the outcome you're trying to achieve. Okay, cool. Yeah, we can do that. And let's show you how.
So in my very early days, and I still think this is in the background of how I drive things, I worked with a framework, right, which was very conveniently had the acronym VALUE, VALUE, right? So, I mean, Karen, if you're listening to this, thank you. But VALUE is an acronym that I've always kept at the back of my mind to drive that customer journey. And if you think about those, the V in value is validate. The A is awareness. The L is learning. The U is usage. And the E is embed. Now, all models, they're going to have some sort of format around that, but that's an acronym that works for me. Validate, right? So it touches on some of the stuff I talked about earlier. Why did they buy, right? what's success for them, and actually, if you think about that, the reality is if you're talking about, say, one of the biggest banks in the world, the chances are the CIO still doesn't know it's probably never heard of your platform, right? Because that person probably only deals with like Microsoft and IBM and all the other giant companies. But that doesn't mean you can't make it relevant to their overall business objectives, right? And one of the things in the validation stage for me, before I even talk to my sales teams, I'll have a scout through the 10K, the annual report, because one of the things that does is it gives you a flavor of how they speak, how they communicate, their language, because your job is to communicate to them in their currency and not yours. So that's all about finding out about them. It's all about talking to your account teams, gathering all that information. Your first meeting with them should never be, can you tell me what your business outcomes are, right? What are you trying to achieve with Tanium, right? What are your pain points? You should know that, right? Your first meeting should be, so I understand this is why you bought us. We understand it's driving these initiatives that helps this strategic priority within your business. Really looking forward to helping you with that. Has anything changed since? Yeah. And that's a good way to tease out whether anything's changed. So that, that's the sort of the validation thing. And it takes it to the next stage. So once you've understood those priorities and the strategic initiatives and then the activities that are driving them, which then perhaps relate directly to the capabilities within your platform, it's like, how do they know they're going to be successful, right? How do they must, they have internal measures of success. How do they know if we haven't been able to find that out in our validation internally, when we need to know how they know they're successful? That's a question you can ask. And actually, your job as a customer success person is to be a bit of a subject matter expert on your product, right?
Yeah.
So you might find yourself in a situation as I did, where I asked that question of a customer and they said, and this is probably because of where they were in the organization, they were like, well, don't know. What do other customers do? And, you should be able to, provide that insight and wisdom around what's good in similar customers or industries, because you may be giving them something else to think about and other routes in. So that's the validate piece. The awareness is, what do they know about what you've got? Do they know what you've bought and why? Do they know what it does? Who do the users understand it, right? What's the user's perception? So it's really gathering that information around where you are. The L is around learning. Quite often you'll face barriers to adoption because people don't even know that you're there, or they know that you're there, but they prefer this platform that they've always used for ages, and they don't realize that your platform could probably do everything that they're doing now and more. And so it's around, where are those learning and awareness gaps, and how are you going to bring through a sort of a learning plan? And by that, I don't just mean training, put them on shed loads of courses. I mean a proper joined up learning plan that addresses the different cohorts, the levels of knowledge, but also the different ways to deliver that training. Your customer may do everything by recorded video. So you may need to make recorded videos. They may use their internal teams and push information out that way. How are you going to help them with that? So it's really important to understand how they consume information and how they get things done. And then when you get to usage, this is where we can move more towards finding the value. So if they're using it, what are they using it for, right? What's it help them do or stop them do? How are they finding it? What is it doing for them? And that's kind of where I was with some of the questions I asked on the example I gave you earlier. If someone's using your platform, that's not a tick in a box and you move on. It's it's on you to find out how they're using it, what they're doing with it, because they might be doing something new and funky and interesting that you and your teams don't know about. So it's about finding out how they're using it, and also finding about the bits they aren't using, because again,
and they might be using it wrong. You know what I
They
mean?
could be-
Usage in and of itself doesn't tell a story.
Absolutely.
And I used to say this, you know, because we get hung up a lot on adoption and utilization.
Yeah.
And I always like to think of it like if you hire a personal trainer, if you hired a personal trainer and they came to you and said, your goal is to use all this equipment in this gym.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, okay, yeah. I want you to use every single piece of equipment. And they come back a week later and they've only used, let's say, a tenth of it or a third of it. You're like, oh no, their gym membership's at risk of churning just solely based on that, right? Usage and adoption is part of the story, but it's not the end all be all. They have to be using it to actually achieve something, and they have to be using it correctly, right? They may be using it incorrectly. So I always caution folks to, you know, it's a piece of the puzzle, but it's not necessarily the end to it from a means, right?
Yeah. It's good to understand usage. It's good to understand how many users, how many teams are using the products. If that is a metric that's really relevant to them, then by all means use it. But if it's not, then it's your own, right? I have a customer, and one of their metrics is a number of identified and remediated vulnerabilities, right? That really matters to them. That's their currency. That's not per se a hard dollar value, but it's something that matters to them. So guess what? I'm reporting that to them in their language, right? Because that's what they want. And then the final piece is is E, which is embed. So if they're using it, how do you really institutionalize it into their business processes? The one the one I really like is we had the lockdown, we had the pandemic a few years ago. We were all in lockdown. Suddenly Zoom became a verb, didn't it? Suddenly Zoom became embedded into everyone's consciousness and into everyone's processes. People didn't say, let's get on a video call. They said, I'll Zoom you, right? So how do you then take your capabilities and then embed those capabilities into their work streams so that it becomes business as usual, right? And then it becomes an integrated part of how they do business. And the reason why that matters is when you get 1 year or 2 year or 3 years down the road, and you're going through the renewal cycles, and you're going to, for example, the chief financial officer, who you probably don't talk to anyway, because you're talking to all the technical folks, and that person looks and they go, why do we need this? What's it actually doing for us? If you've got it embedded so that it's something that is an essential part of how they do business, if folks are using it and they're getting real monetary value, real tangible material value from it, then that's, you want, the whole point of all this is for your renewal to be a non-event, to be a formality. And that's why that's how that helps. So that's always been, how I approach it. And I think if I was anyone that was approaching that with their customer, it's around finding that thing, because the ultimate aim of the game is to make your renewal an on entry by identifying all these advocates and really embedding what you've got into their business.
I love that. And I think I also loved how you just connected basically the keywords, right? So adoption and value, right? Measurable value, because I think it's exactly what you said. The adoption kind of has to make sense, right? The adoption data you're collecting and how you connect that to a health score, or however you correlate that. Because I remember like maybe a decade ago, everybody was still talking about, okay, I need adoption data, right? I need to connect it to customer health somehow. And then the discussion started, and it's not even a small discussion. How often do you need that data, and how current does it need to be? Do you need, like, many people a decade ago thought, okay, I need real-time data, right? I need to know exactly what my customer is doing right now with the platform, right? Which might make sense in a very transactional, security-related tool, right? Which is also required for the daily business. But another extreme example, if you're a reporting platform, right, and you might be required for certain reporting or certifications, your tool might be used twice, 3, 4 times a year by key personnel, right? There might be other usages around that and adoptions, but those are the key moments where you need to understand that your tool is used. And it kind of shows you also the complexity of SaaS, which we tend to oversimplify a bit by comparing very transactional real-time software with software which you might need for reporting purposes. And I think that's just super important to always keep that in mind. Which leads me to the topic of saying, we talked about customer journeys, right? We talked about to understand that, we talked about value frameworks and how to add that to your journey. And I would love to connect that to maybe a topic that's rarely discussed, which I would call a value journey, because that's exactly what we're talking about, right? We want to understand who is benefiting from leveraging the tool, benefiting from the outcome, and how can we support their career and make them look good, which is a story we want to tell, right? And that to me is a value story, how they generated value.
Totally. Absolutely. I can only agree with you on that.
Value journeys.
Yeah. And, and I think actually, I don't know, I'm just thinking out loud here, but maybe the term customer success might change in the future, right? Because, sometimes, I know in the early days, it was seen as a bit of a, it was a bit of a nice to have, sort of the title customer success. In fact, I remember talking to one of my friends like 8 or 9 years ago, and I was like, oh, I work in customer success now. And she said, oh, does that mean you bring donuts and kittens into your customers' offices then, to make them feel happy and all that kind of stuff? And I think it still gets, it's still tarred with a bit of that. But I feel like maybe the word value might become more prevalent in the future, and I don't know what format that will take, whether you become a customer value specialist or I don't know, but I do feel like the focus and the onus is definitely moving to more value rather than or as well as success, right?
I've actually seen it in some titles. So I'm out there applying for a lot of jobs, and I've seen it in some spaces where they have customer value manager, director of customer value. So
yeah,
whether that's actually changed what it is that particular organization is doing or not, or if they're just kind of rearranging the deck chairs, so to speak, time will tell. Yeah. But I wanted to just touch upon something you said, just a point, Paul, because I think it's such a missed opportunity in customer success. You had mentioned when talking to your customers are looking at you as, hey, you're the expert in your product. You're the expert in what other customers are doing. So tell me, customers want to hear from other customers. And I see this as just a huge missed opportunity in customer success. And we often, I would say, defer to marketing for customer success stories. I think customer success stories should be coming from customer success managers. They're closest to that situation. Yeah. And I think oftentimes we think about like slay the dragon stories, like as Stephen had mentioned earlier. And I don't think they have to be that grandiose. They don't have to be that spectacular. And I think where the real missed opportunity in customer success is keeping a database of simple customer successes. So simple format. What was the solution? What was the problem? Excuse me. What was the situation? What was the problem? What was the solution? What was the outcome? And you can then draw upon those things, whether they're verticalized or, based on like employee size, what have you. And they don't have to be your customers. So just more of a comment, and maybe you can chime in as well. Is that something you're seeing as kind of like a big gap in what customer success managers are doing these days? Are they actually gathering like good customer success stories that they can share with other customers?
You know what, 100% to everything you've said there. I mean, we've done that. We've done that. We've done the whole customer value piece. We self-curated and built a bank of success stories by industry. We described the challenge they were facing. We were able to articulate how we solved the problem. We were able to, highlight the value, the material value that customer gained. We were able to highlight whether the customer's okay with that being public or not, because quite often they're not, and you have to anonymize the story. And we kind of built a huge resource. We also encouraged our sales and pre-sales folks to contribute as well. So over time, we built a really useful bank of information, and I think that's something that you should do. We're fortunate. We do have an advocacy program here. We have an advocacy team that can help us with that kind of stuff. But I also think that we should look to the folks on the ground that are picking up these stories as well. And that's a good way to multiply the success stories that you have and the case studies, because our job is, yes, we're here to drive success for the customer, but we're here to help our business grow as well. So those sort of successes can help drive the upsell in life, but also they can help your sales and pre-sales folks. If they're talking to a manufacturer and a manufacturer wants to know where you've been successful before and what sort of things you've done, then hopefully they can plug into that. So, it's definitely something that can be crowdsourced, providing the teams, have the bandwidth and a bit of support to do so.
Yeah, and I think the real miss here is, I think oftentimes we think they have to be these published like stories with great ROI and what have you. And there's a place for that. Like, I get it, but they just have to simply be like the problems you solved and how your solution solved those problems and what the outcomes were. Ideally, they're quantifiable, right? They have some kind of number tied to them. But again, something you can share internally with other CSMs, you can share with marketing, you can share with sales to help develop like ICPs, or even like ideal, like what your ideal customer looks like. Sell to these types of customers.
And also, it might be a quicker way as well for you to get buy-in from a prospective customer. If you've both got intimacy with that customer and you have really good relationships, then there's no reason why you can't facilitate them talking to each other directly, or you run a user event, right? And you invite users to that event and you're talking about usage. So, you can easily do that kind of thing. Yeah. And we've done that.
I love that. You mentioned sales and solution consulting, pre-sales a little bit earlier, and we've talked previously a bit about the future of customer success, the involvement of AI technology, how that might change the landscape and how that might influence what we're doing. And we've seen quite a few vendors appearing on the market which are revolutionizing the way that BDR, SDR approaches are done, right? So many of us are already seeing their inboxes now filled with emails, which are from a qualitative standpoint a bit better than they were a few years ago, right? So there's usually a few pickups from your website, from your name, maybe from a LinkedIn profile. So you see this data sourced somehow and the messaging improves. And do you expect also for customer success to see something similar? Because basically over the last decade, we've seen customer success tool vendors pop up, right? So there are quite a few dozen probably now on the market. They all work with some kind of adoption tracking, call to actions, customer health scoring, et cetera, et cetera. But the real revolution do you see something appearing on the horizon, maybe also tied to the value story, where you think, okay, this could be something where technology, for example, AI or something else, might support that? Or is there a hope, what you would hope that it would fix for you?
That's really interesting. I kind of want to say yes, but I also want to say no. and I guess the reason why I want to say yes is because, AI is going to become more capable. It's going to become more useful. You're going to get agents redefining work, and, they're going to be everyday companions. So I think that organizations will leverage that because it will help them drive, efficiencies, and help them to do more with the customers, right? And I'm, you know, I'm not an expert, so if that's what the experts say is going to happen, I'm totally go for it, right? Fill your boots. But I sometimes just wonder, you know, if I'm a customer, especially a smaller customer, and I'm just getting all this impersonal AI generated stuff from me, am I going to look at it? Am I going to take it seriously? Am I just going to spam it in the bin or tell my IT about it? And I just wonder about, you know, the quality, the contextualization of that. Do you know what I mean? So I do think it's got a future, but I think it's with caveats. And I think that, you know, if you look at roles that are out there, the, you know, AI leaders, they're becoming more of a thing within organizations. And so I think, you know, part of the role of them moving forwards is to get to grips with some of these things, and also whilst making sure they comply ethically and all that sort of stuff. So that's I know that's a bit on the fence, but that's kind of how I see it at the moment.
And I think it's also so super interesting, right? Because recently I had a very long conversation with someone from the engineering sphere, and we talked a lot about how the whole sphere, the whole market is basically changing now with AI, right? And how basically over the last decades we saw, like with social media and vendors and CRM systems and all these kind of tech stories coming to market, and all benefiting from like a new approach, how to connect, right? How to connect people, how to connect data, how to collaborate in the company.
Yeah.
And we basically came to the point that we thought, okay, the next big thing, and you can kind of read that also in some publications, the next big thing actually favors, again, the large vendors, because it's data, right? So all the vendors that have all the data, that can correlate the data and can make sense of the data, is kind of probably a big advantage for the next step and next wave of tools, right? Do you think that too?
I do, actually. I think I can see that. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Look at that stunned silence.
that was a professionally done handover. I'm getting something from the director. Sorry. Yep. Okay, go ahead.
No, Paul, just like, what do you think, just thinking about the future and what skills you'll need to develop, where do you see, if you had to pick maybe just one, like what's a quintessential skill that somebody in customer success would need to develop to future-proof their career? What do you think that would be?
I would get commercially savvy and understand that everything that your customer is trying to do with your product should derive some material benefit in some way, and be able to work that through. Because for two reasons: if you're doing that, you're ensuring your relevancy to them, and you're proving that what you've got is really showing value to them. But also internally, you know, if you think about all the things that have gone on with CS in the last few years, you know, organizations have been cold and people have been laid off and downsized and all the rest of it. You know, one of the things it's really important to do in CS is to show the material value, the monetary value that you're delivering into the business, right? And the only way you can do that is by highlighting the material value you're delivering to the customer, which makes them loyal to you, and also the upsell. So I would get commercially savvy. I would really understand ROI and value, and I would, you know, really get to grips with how you're going to work that out, and make sure that you are doing that in the context of what's important to them.
Love that. And Paul, those have been really, really great suggestions, and I would hope everybody took notes and kind of gets prepared of how everything in the market will change in the future. And also from conversations yesterday, I can see that some still don't want to believe how quickly and how much things are changing. And I think that's where we all need to do our homework. And I know we've taken a lot of your time, and we're so thankful that you took the time to share your experience, your knowledge, and just being just such a fun guest for us. So thank you for that. And I would love to add with maybe giving you the opportunity to have like one little message towards what would you think, and this would be your parting words maybe for today's session. What would be something where you think in 5 years of time, what changes dramatically in B2B SaaS in general? What is changing about the industry, the roles, or maybe the understanding of those type of companies in general? Do you have an idea about that?
I think, we can't, we've touched on AI previously. Obviously, that's going to be a big part of things moving forwards. I think we'll see more AI-focused people in the organization. I think for a CS person, especially if they're in lower and tech touch, that really is going to help them. And I think, again, to be really successful, you've got to think material value, you've got to think tangible, and you've got to be savvy with how you can get that. Some folks are really lucky; they have people within their organizations that do value engineering that can help them with that. But if you don't, it would be a really important skill to discover. So I think the focus is going to be more on, I think, commercially savvy customer success people.
All right. Cool. Thank you so much, Paul. It was so much fun. And of course, the recording will be available to anyone who still wants to re-listen to this or wants to listen to it who couldn't be part of this live. So thank you so much for joining us today, Paul. Thanks for making it work. We had a few hiccups in the connection in the meantime, but I think every word was understood. So
Great.
Hotel Wi-Fi didn't leave us hanging. Thanks for the support, Jim, as well. So thank you. Hope to see you soon again. We will surely stay in touch. And to everybody else, thank you for joining today and have a good evening. And I think with that, good night, Paul. Good night, Jim. Speak very soon.
Cheers, everybody. Let's do a gig soon, Stephen.
Yes, sure. I'll find a concert. And to everybody else down there, thanks for joining. It's a wrap for today. I think we had a super valuable session about customer value journeys, customer value topics, success stories, dragon stories, adoption, so many topics we touched on. Hope you took notes. Thanks again to Jim and Paul for such an exciting session today. We will be back next week at Wednesday again, 5 p.m. CET, and we will be announcing our next guest on Friday. By the way, our most beloved guests also have the opportunity to come back, so you might see some of them again in the future. So feel free to comment whoever you want to see back. I guess Paul already has that vote up. And until then, to customer value and beyond, and have a good week. Bye-bye.